if you've had painful relationships, you may have started to ask yourself, why does this keep happening to me? And in trying to get the answer to that question, you may have discovered something called attachment theory and attachment styles. And if you're here watching this video, you've probably identified yourself as having an anxious attachment system, which is great. That's a really great place to start. But once you've identified as being an anxiously attached person, you may now be wondering, well, how do I move towards a more secure attachment? How do I become that optimal attachment style so that I can have the healthy relationships that I want? Because you might know this, but attachment styles are not fixed. We can heal, we can learn how to become more secure, and then it makes it so much easier for us to find real healthy love. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. How to become more securely attached if you identify as having an anxious attachment style. I'll be making another video on how to heal an avoidant attachment style in the future, but today we're starting with anxious, and we're going to go back to basics, because if we really want to shift our attachment style, we've got to understand why we're doing it and what's really going on here. So we're starting with the basics today, but if you already know a lot about attachment styles and attachment theory, and you want to skip ahead to the how part, you can use the timestamps in the video. All right, so what the heck is attachment theory? You may have heard that term. You may have identified yourself as having an anxious attachment system, but let's break down what that really means. So I've got my notes here. So attachment theory is basically a psychological framework that explains the importance of emotional connection between people, and particularly long-term relationships, such as those between parents and children, or romantic partners. So when people say theory, this doesn't mean that there's no research behind it. It's just a way to give a framework, to give a conceptual framework. It's just a way to really talk about the relationships between people and how all this develops. So there is actually research behind it. So what this theory says is that when we are born as humans, we have an innate need for attachment, which is another way of saying emotional connection between ourselves and our caregivers. And the experiences you have in these early relationships can affect the way that you relate to people for the rest of your life, including the kinds of partners that you end up choosing for a romantic relationship. So the first person who talked about attachment theory was a man named John Bowlby. And what he saw in his research was that children are drawn towards caregivers. They have an innate desire to be close to the person who's their primary caregiver, a mother, a father, aunt, uncle, whoever is in charge of caregiving for them. That's what they have a need to be close to. They have a need to be close to their caregiver in general, but what he also noticed is that especially when a child felt scared or threatened, they really wanted to be close to their caregivers so that they felt comforted and safe. Now, you might be hearing this and being like, well, duh, that's obvious. I love to really go into this because I think it can be so validating for someone who has an anxious attachment style to know that it is natural within you to move towards people who you're close to when you're scared, when you're feeling threatened, when you're not feeling safe. There is nothing wrong with that need. That is a normal and natural human response. So that's the basic theory here. Children have a desire to be close to their caregivers when they're feeling threatened in some way. Now, depending on how your caregiver responds to you in those moments when you do need some comforting, when you do need some safety, that is what we call your attachment style. The experience that you have with your caregivers creates your blueprint, your nervous system pattern of how you relate to people as you get older. So there's a couple main kinds of attachment patterns that we can form. One is the anxious. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to share more about how that develops and how you can shift it. But you can also have what we call a dismissive attachment style or dismissive avoidant. Another way of describing an anxious is a fearful attachment style. You can also have a fearful avoidant, which is a mix of both a anxious attachment style and a dismissive attachment style. Again, I'm not going to go into those other types today, but the other type you can have is a more secure attachment style, and that's considered a healthy attachment pattern to have. So another reason I like to go back to basics here is because sometimes when we discover that we have what they call an insecure attachment style, which would be an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment, we can tend to blame ourselves. We can think that there was something wrong, there's something wrong with us, we've done something wrong in some way, maybe it's a weakness, maybe we're too sensitive. No, I want to take the blame out of all of this because blame is actually what makes it really difficult for us to make a change and move forward. We have done nothing wrong here. We have developed these ways of relating to the world and other people because of our early experiences with our caregivers, because of how they responded or not to us when we were distressed, when we needed their help. Now, it might be natural to then want to blame our caregivers or our parents for creating that attachment style within us, but we really can't do that either, because if we look back, our parents developed likely an insecure attachment from their caregivers, their parents, and on and on and on. So there really is no blame here. It would be really difficult for us to try to go back and find the origin of insecure attachment styles. So let's take the blame out of it and focus on what we can do to move forward and become more secure. All right, so let's talk about what an anxious attachment style means. So this is also known as a preoccupied attachment style, and what it means is that you likely identified yourself as having an anxious attachment style because you have a couple things going on. You may have a strong fear of abandonment, like a fear that someone is going to leave you at any moment. You might feel like you need a ton of reassurance when you're in relationships, and you also might be really scared of having too much alone time, too much independence in a relationship. If you're anxiously attached, you may have difficulty trusting others. You really just generally might not feel safe in relationships. And you might feel like you're overly dependent on the people in your life to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel confident. And you might be really sensitive to your partner's moods, to their behaviors. It might feel like you have a ton of emotions in a relationship. This is typically what it looks like to have an anxious attachment pattern. So how do you become anxiously attached? Well, it goes back to, again, the experiences we had early on with our caregivers. So, for example, if you were a child and you were in distress, you were scared, you needed some comfort, and sometimes your caregiver was able to provide that comfort. Like maybe they could give you a hug some days and go, oh, it's okay, you're all right. But then other times they were not able to do that. You got nothing. Maybe they were even critical of you. You learned in your nervous system that care, that comfort is only available sometimes. It's inconsistent. And when that's the case, it's very confusing for a young child. You don't feel safe. You don't know when you're going to get that comfort and when you're not. So remember, this is not your fault. We're not going to blame, but just understand that this is not a personal failing. This is not a sensitivity. This is an experience you had when you were younger because of the way your caregivers responded or didn't. So that's what it looks like when you're a child. Now, when you get older, how this anxious attachment shows up in relationships is a little bit different. It feels like being really, really uncomfortable when there's a lot of distance in the relationship. It can also feel like you have a ton of difficulty with setting boundaries because you just want to make that relationship work. You just don't want to be alone, so you'll do whatever it takes to stay in the relationship and make it work. And it can also look like minimizing or ignoring unhealthy behaviors, red flags, because again, the primary fear for someone who's anxiously attached is being abandoned. So again, you just want to stay in that relationship no matter what. So the most important takeaway here is that we can heal an anxious attachment pattern. This is not something that is fixed within you for life. We can move towards becoming more secure. So I'm going to tell you how to do that in a second here. But before we get into how to heal an anxious attachment style, I want to pause and make sure that when you've identified yourself as being anxious in relationships, that it truly is an anxious attachment system and not that you're in a toxic or unhealthy relationship. The reason I say this, I've talked to many, many clients. So I'm an energy healer and a coach, and I help my clients go from bad relationships to real love. I usually do my intro in the beginning, but welcome here if you're new. But so I work with lots of clients to help them to become more secure, to have healthy relationships by releasing subconscious blocks. And I've talked to many, many clients who identified themselves as having an anxious attachment pattern when, yeah, maybe they had a little bit of that tendency, but they were really just in unhealthy relationships that were super triggering, that were super unsafe, unhealthy. Their partner was very critical or maybe really, really distant and avoidant. And anyone would feel these things in a relationship like that. So if you're not sure, I'm going to leave a video here at the end of this video talking about how to know whether you're in a healthy relationship or not, whether the relationship is good for you or it's toxic or unhealthy. So check that out if you're maybe not sure if you really do truly have an anxious attachment style. All right, let's talk about how to heal an anxious attachment pattern, how to become more secure. So the first thing, and the thing that I consider the most important, is subconscious emotional healing. Because when we're talking about our childhood experiences, our early experiences with our caregivers, almost all of that stuff is in the subconscious. It's actually why I specialize in subconscious work to help my clients find healthy love, because so much is going on in that subconscious. And the way this looks is we might keep getting into painful relationship after painful relationship and really not having an awareness of why, because it's not conscious. All of these wounds are just sitting in the subconscious, which means we're not consciously aware of them. When we make decisions, I think I've heard it said that like 90% of where we're making those decisions comes from the subconscious or the unconscious mind. So if we want to heal and shift these attachment patterns, the focus needs to be on healing the subconscious. So let me break that down even further for you. When we're talking about attachment, we bond in attachment through emotions, through the good emotions, the happiness, the joy, the love, and we also bond through challenging emotions, painful emotions. So in order to unwind an anxious attachment pattern, we have to get to the emotions, the negative emotions that are creating that fear of being abandoned, that fear that you can't really trust someone, the fear that someone's going to leave you at any moment. When we dive into the subconscious, and I do this through energy healing with my clients, we can get to those original wounds that were going on when you experienced those times with your caregivers when they were not able to soothe you, when they were not able to be present. And so there can be energies from very early in your life, maybe 3-4 years old, even before that, energies of abandonment, energies of fear, panic because your caregiver wasn't able to respond to you. And so all of that stuff just sits in your subconscious until we can release that. And like I said, my favorite method is energy healing because we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to try to find it consciously. Subconscious knows exactly where it is, and it tells me as the energy healer, and I am able to release that energy once we identify where it's coming from. And your subconscious tells me all of that. So what we're doing when we're diving in and healing the subconscious is we're really giving our system a chance to process the emotions that maybe we couldn't have at the time. If we were in distress and our caregiver wasn't able to soothe us, then that energy is really not able to be fully processed out of your system. So it gets suppressed. It goes into the subconscious. So in a safe environment, now that we're an adult, we can take care of these subconscious wounds, process those energies out, release them, and then our nervous system feels much more safe and secure. So we're soothing and calming the nervous system so that we're able to have more discernment when we're getting into relationships. So we're not just jumping into a relationship with the first person who shows up. Because we're so afraid of being abandoned, we are able to be much more calm and much more discerning so that we can pick a really good partner for ourselves. So that's the first step, the subconscious healing. The second step that kind of goes along with that, but it's a little bit, I put it in a different category here, rewiring negative subconscious beliefs. So if you have an anxious attachment system, you probably have a lot of beliefs about people leaving you, or maybe that you're not good enough, or that there's something wrong with you. And again, those beliefs can live very, very deep in the subconscious. We may have no idea that they're even there. So my favorite way to do that, again, is through the energy healing. I can actually release negative beliefs with my clients through energy healing. It's incredible. I think it's the most amazing thing ever. And we can install positive beliefs. But there's other ways to do that. Some people do it through hypnosis. I've done that in the past too. But really, any way that you can address the negative subconscious beliefs that are living in your system that tell you things like you're not enough, or that people are always going to leave you, or that you're alone. When you rewire those beliefs to something more positive, like I am lovable, and I am safe, and I'm connected, then again, the nervous system just goes, whew, it just calms down. You feel more safe, you feel more secure, and that again enables you to choose much better partners for yourself, because again, you're not ignoring red flags when your nervous system is soothed and you're not worried about being abandoned. So those are the big ones here, that subconscious work and then rewiring the negative subconscious beliefs that are the fuel to that anxious attachment system. So the next thing here that's really important when we're trying to heal an anxious attachment pattern is learning how to self-soothe. So when we were children, we were not able to self-soothe. Our nervous system just couldn't do that. We need other people to soothe us when we're young. But when we're adults, our brains are fully developed, we actually can learn how to do this ourselves. So there's so many resources out there for self-soothing. If you just put into Google or YouTube self-soothing practices, you'll see a ton of resources. But really what we're trying to do here is when we're anxious, learning how to take care of some of those needs ourselves. So maybe for you, you're really drawn to deep breathing exercises. Maybe meditation helps you. I used to do some deep breathing and I would take a blanket and wrap it around myself, and that just made me feel safe and secure. There's so many different ways you can learn to self-soothe when you're having these moments of distress where it's going to feel like, oh my gosh, I need someone to help me. Not always, not always. There's a lot that we can learn how to do for ourselves to, again, soothe that nervous system so we're not operating from so much anxiety. Another really important step to shift an anxious attachment system and become more secure is to find secure people and start connecting with them. So if we have an insecure attachment pattern, which is what anxious is, we can tend to be drawn towards people who are also in that insecure attachment style. We can tend to be drawn towards other anxious people or more avoidant people, and that can make it feel like that's what love is. Love is with people who can't consistently show up for me. Love is people who are hot and cold or who make me feel insecure. So in order to rewire our nervous system to learn what healthy love feels like, we need to seek out those healthy, attached people and start to have relationships with them. And this could even look like starting out with a therapist or a counselor, somebody who can be a neutral person for you and consistently show up. Support groups can be a really great way to show yourself, to show your nervous system what healthy love looks like. And that goes into my next thing here, my next step for healing an anxious attachment pattern, which is learning what healthy love looks like. So another reason that we continue to get into painful relationships is because our nervous system is familiar with inconsistency. If we're anxiously attached, remember that was our childhood experience. And so that's what's familiar to us. And we're consistently drawn towards people who mimic that, who show us that same way of relating. And so we may have no idea what healthy love actually looks like. So if this is you, you might benefit from getting my ebook that I wrote. It's about what real love looks like, what healthy love looks like. So I'm going to leave the link in the description. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Real Love. In it, I talk about what it looks like very specifically, all the healthy relationship behaviors that you want to look for in a partner, in a relationship, so that you can move from anxious to secure love. So the last step here to become more securely attached when we have an anxious attachment style is, now that we know what healthy love looks like, what healthy relationship behaviors look like, it's going out and practicing them. So it means practicing being emotionally available, practicing having good communication, sharing openly how you feel with someone, and then stepping back and watching how people respond to your healthy relationship behaviors. If the person is showing up with their own healthy relationship behaviors, great, move forward with them. If they aren't, then that's a sign to you that this might not be a person who is compatible with you and the kind of relationship that you're looking for when you show up in that healthy, secure way. So if you're not sure whether you're anxiously attached or not, or whether you're just in maybe a toxic or unhealthy relationship, then check out this video here.